Restricting exports to Huawei. Next move, what are they?
Well, Huawei has been out encouraging American companies to flaunt the U.S. laws, to flaunt the regulations that we have. That's a very dangerous practice, and it's not a very good practice, and longer term, not going to be good for them. We are examining always all the mechanisms of export controls, and they've heightened our sensitivity on the one that they're encouraging Americans to flaunt, and that's the de minimis rule about moving things offshore.
Secretary Ross, objectives are important. I just wonder if the objective is just to cut Huawei off from US exports. Is that the ultimate objective here?
No, the ultimate objective is to protect national security interests.
How do you look at the national security interests on the one hand and phase two talks on the other hand? Can you reconcile the two things? Here's for me where it's been difficult following the administration. I'm told on the one hand the Huawei story is on a separate track.
It is.
And then the president will tell you otherwise.
Well, I mean, you're quoting from the president your version of things. I can tell you.
Well, I could get his words specifically. The president has said it's all part of the same story.
Huawei is an enforcement action. It was not negotiated during phase one. And as we stand right here, there's no particular intent to negotiate it in phase two.
So you believe, quite truly, that you could cut off Huawei and still progress with phase two trade talks?
Well, you're building some assumptions in. We didn't say...
No, I'm asking questions. I'm exploring that with you now.
Yeah, but we haven't cut off Huawei. What we have cut off are things that we think are particularly militarily sensitive and otherwise troublesome.
Why do you think those rules are necessary? What do you think would happen if those rules weren't in place?
Well, I don't even understand the question. We have, for years, maintained lists, entity lists.
Sure. So let me ask the question a little differently so you understand it perfectly.
That's nothing new.
If you were to cut off US exports to Huawei, why would those rules be necessary? Why is that so important from a national security standpoint? What's the ultimate worry of the administration?
That's not even what we're talking about. We have given some licenses to people to go through on Huawei. So you're creating some sort of a hypothetical question that doesn't correspond to what we're actually doing.
I'm looking at the track and where things are heading, and ultimately that could be where things are heading. And I think a lot of people are interested in the story as it evolves as to what may or may not happen in the future. Forgive me for posing hypotheticals, but I think that's worth a conversation, isn't it?
Well, maybe it is, but we try to deal with realities rather than with hypotheticals.
Let's deal with the reality of phase two. How difficult is this going to be?
Well, I think now that the confidence has been built, now that the mutual trust has been built, and now that we've covered some of the sensitive issues, it should be getting easier, not harder.
The United States this time is getting together with the EU and Japan, a multilateral effort through the WTO to try and get the Chinese to scale back on subsidizing key parts of their industries.
Right, well, that's a huge problem.
It's a massive issue, and I've discussed it many times on programs on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio, and I think a lot of people have sympathy with the administration. It's always a debate about approach. How do we achieve the ultimate outcome? Walk me through how this is going to work as we go through the WTO with the likes of the EU, with the likes of Japan. It's a different approach compared to what the United States has done with China over the last 2 years.
No, the reason we took unilateral action in a lot of different sectors, including the steel and aluminum, is we were getting no place in terms of meaningful cooperation from the EU. It's not our favorite course. It's the course we had to take. We're very disappointed, frankly, that the European Union has not put in very much in the way of safeguards. And as a result of the failure to take concerted action, that's why China is, believe it or not, building more steel capacity. If the EU had cooperated sooner, you and the EU and we and the world would have been saved a lot of grief.
When it comes to subsidies, is it just about steel, or is it a whole lot more broadly?
Not. It's about a lot of things.
Because made in China 2025, some people would say China quite arrogantly came out and said, we're going to dominate these industries by this time point. They seem to have backed away from the phrase, but it's pretty clear what they want to achieve.
Well, I don't think they've changed the behavior. They've changed the language because they know it hit a raw nerve in the West.
How quickly would you like to see a change of behavior? What's doable?
Well, we're already seeing it. The very fact that China in phase one acknowledged forced technology transfers had been occurring. That's the first time, I believe, there's been that public recognition. And they not only recognized that they were occurring, they agreed they were a problem and agreed to prohibit them. That's huge progress.
Two different things are going on here, though. There's some pressure being applied to the Europeans on the one hand to open things up, lower barriers to entry into the market. A lot of people, as I say, have sympathy with that effort. But at the same time, we're trying to partner up with the EU to put the pressure on the Chinese. Can we do all these things at once, Wilbur?
Well, sure, because what we're trying to do is to get China to comply with other rules.
How do you get the partners to come with you at the same time as putting pressure on them and threatening them with auto tariffs?
Well, people should be able to deal with more than one concept at the same time.
Well, let's get another concept into this conversation as we wrap things up. I know you've been a busy guy over the last couple of days. I also know you met with the interim president of Venezuela today as well.
Yes.
What did you talk about?
Well, we've been supporters of the Guaido regime, the legitimate regime, from early days. If anything, we're more determined to be continuing in our support. And again, we're disappointed that Europe is not joining with us in the sanctions.
Are you surprised that others haven't come with you, Secretary Ross, at a time when the administration has started to act a whole lot more unilaterally through this administration over the last couple of years?
Well, I'm disappointed. I would have thought Europe would be far more sensitive to human rights. Europe's approach seems to be very selectively sensitive to human rights.
Why do you think that is?
I have no idea why it is. I think it's ill-conceived. How anybody could be supporting the Maduro regime, which the failure to put sanctions is supporting.
Which part of Europe would you think is supporting the Maduro regime right now?
Well, anybody who hasn't agreed to sanctions, anybody who hasn't agreed to recognize the legitimate Guaido government.
Do you think there could be a disagreement on the effectiveness of sanctions?
There may be, and if that were the nature of the discussion, it would be something that one could discuss. That's not the nature.
I want to round things out with a final question on human rights abuses in China. Big issue in Xinjiang. There are some dreadful stories being written in the Washington Post, the New York Times. We've all seen some of these reports. Is it difficult to sit around a table and strike a trade deal when you know those allegations are around?
Well, we've taken some actions, as you know, some of the sanctions that we put in some of the entity lists. So we're not ignoring those problems. But as I said earlier in the interview, we think one government should be able to have more than one idea at the same time.